All right. See who survives. Oh, my goodness. So, in our last episode, yesterday, we finished our time by going through about 4 different areas, modeling and addressing and breaking things off corporately. And so tonight we're going to do 2 areas. Finish it up. Like some of you are like, who is this guy? What's he going to do to us? We have a basket of snakes in the back. No. Just kidding. Just kidding. Valerie keeps those at her house. So, you know, there's 2 kinds of wounding that we go through, 2 kinds of trauma that people go through. The one that we're most familiar with is with whenever we experience an event that is difficult, something is painful in our experiences, something is traumatic, something that happened to you or something that you did. I mean, but it's just a pain. And what happens is that sometimes whenever those things happen is that we have a perspective rather than fully heaven's perspective, and oftentimes a lie begins to be implanted with us, and we believe a lie, act out a lie, and of course what happens, our belief system produces what our thinking process, and then that produces how we feel, and then sometimes people get stuck until they go back to that event and deal with it. This is something that this church does. It helps people walk through their events. The sozo stuff, the inner healing stuff, that's one of the things it does. It helps people work through those traumatic experiences. You do not have permission to look at your past except through the eyes of the cross and what Jesus did. And he has a way of enabling you to see the past through his eyes, through his heart, that changes everything, so that that thing that happened to you in the past no longer has power over you, and you're able to move forward into life and move into your destiny. There is another kind of trauma, another kind of pain that we go through that is just as painful as that, but it's not because it's something that you experienced, it's something that you did not experience. This is a trauma of lack. This is a trauma that you didn't get what you needed when you were growing up. This is a void that is in your life because you just didn't get your needs met, and because of that, you feel this pain, this trauma of your past, and it feels just as painful as if it had been a single event. For example, let's suppose here's a woman who, when she's growing up, she had a dysfunctional father. Let's say that he just couldn't meet her needs growing up. I mean, he was a good man. He was able to provide for the family. He didn't, sexually or physically abuse her in any way. He just was not available to her. He was just emotionally absent. He couldn't connect with her, and especially as she got older, he didn't know how to relate to her. And so he didn't really love her. He didn't really say, I love you. And he just didn't know how to connect emotionally with his daughter. And because of that, she felt the pain of not getting what she needed when she grew up. And the pain that she feels is as painful as if she had an event that happened, a traumatic event. I mean, it feels pretty much the same. So what she does is that she goes to her church's inner healing rooms, sets up the appointment. She goes up, and then all of a sudden they find some events in the past, because there's no shortage of offenses that took place in her history. So something's going to come up. I'm old, but when I was 6 years old, my dad he didn't come to my birthday party. He didn't meet my needs. He wasn't there, and so you forgive your father for what he did, and you walk away, and you go, and you're feeling pretty good for a couple of weeks, and all of a sudden the pain begins to rise up again. So you make an appointment, you go back to the inner healing session, you address another area that came up. Oh, when I was 7, he didn't make the school play or something like that, and then you feel okay. I forgive him for doing this event, and then another 2 weeks later, the pain comes back up. And you see, the only model that a lot of us have for dealing with pain or trauma in our life is go back to the event and let God help us see these events through his eyes. But the source of that woman's trauma is not the events, it is the lack of what she never got. And so that pain it keeps coming back, because you can't cast out the lack. And you can't fix something because she had just an emotionally absent father. Her solution for her healing is not found in going to the healing rooms every other week. Her healing is found when she gets connected with people in life-giving relationships. Those needs need to get met. And the way those needs are going to get met is not by going to the inner healing rooms over and over again. She needs to be connected with people. She needs to be connected in life-giving relationship, and so healing is going to take place in relationship. Wounded people find healing in the midst of relationship. But oftentimes, wounded people are the ones that run from relationship rather than to relationship. God is the great healer, and he can fix any wound, and he can redeem everything for his good. But there's a process that we just need to come into. A lot of us don't always realize the power that joy has in a person's life. Your capacity to face obstacles and struggles and difficult things, your capacity to do that is dependent upon how quickly can you return to joy in your life. You see, we need to have a large joy capacity that when I go through, because we all go through difficult, hard times. Whenever you go through those times, how quickly can you return to the place of joy? Do you have a large joy capacity, or do you have a very small joy capacity? Your joy capacity is what enables you to go through life. You look at the book of Philippians, you got this guy named Paul, right? He writes this book of Philippians that we call the book of joy. Do y'all remember where he was when he wrote it? Prison. That's not a happy place, but yet he writes a book of joy. Because you see, his joy did not come from his circumstances. It came from his relationship with God. He had a large joy capacity. He had a large joy bucket that to pull from. So even though he was going through difficult times, he was able to return to joy very quickly. Nehemiah chapter 8 verse 10 says, the joy of the Lord is my strength. So what does joy feel like? Well, joy feels like whenever somebody's glad to see you, that basically, fills up your joy bucket. I mean, when somebody welcomes you and they go, hey, so glad to see you. Good. I mean, all of a sudden you feel, okay, you feel good. Like somebody likes me. Like somebody, wants to see me. I mean, Walmart figured that out. That's why they have greeters, right? When you come inside, welcome to Walmart. We're so glad you're here, And that's because it makes you feel good, and so when somebody's glad to see you, your joy bucket, your joy capacity just kind of gets it kind of fills your joy bucket there. I mean, if you walk in the room, they look at you and they go, "Oh, it's you." I mean, that does nothing for your joy. I mean, that doesn't do anything at all. And so what happens is that as we grow up as children, it's like, how were people glad to see you? Were your parents glad that you were there? I mean, because if you grew up in a home where they're always welcoming you, glad to see you, then what happens is that your joy bucket happens to increase. But one of the problems growing up is that we didn't have those people around us always that was glad to see us and that welcomed us. And it's that joy capacity that enables you to be an overcomer in life. Let me give you some science here. Dr. Friesen and Dr. Wilder wrote a book called Life Model, and they like to deal with the sciences with this stuff. And they basically said that your joy center is in the part of the brain in the right orbital prefrontal cortex. I think it's up here somewhere, And this is what they said in this joy center. It said it is the executive control over the entire emotional system. When the joy center has been sufficiently developed, as you're growing up, your joy capacity increases. When it's been sufficiently developed, it regulates emotions, pain control, and immunity center. It guides us to act like ourselves. It releases neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, and it is the only part of the brain that overrides the main drive centers like food and sexual impulses, terror, and rage. They have a little science to this stuff with study stuff, okay, as well. So our capacity to get through pain is dependent upon how deep our joy capacity is, how developed our joy center is. And that really comes through life-giving relationships there. So whenever you get into life-giving community, life-giving relationships, and that's the way the church, by the way, is supposed to be functioning. Whenever we have this life-giving community center, then what happens when you relate to people in the appropriate way, it happens to feed that part inside of them. Now, ultimately, we need to recognize this, that God, if we can know that every time we come into His presence, He's always glad to see us. Okay, so one of the ways our joy center is developed is because in our walk and our relationship with God, it's an intimate thing that we know it's like when we come up here and we're worshiping or wherever you're worshiping and I'm connecting with Him in this worship, if you could just hear His voice, it's going to say, man, I'm glad to see you. Oh, you're just so awesome. But because we have these barriers between us and God, we're not able to let Him give us the joy that comes from him, because we're not always hearing him say how he's glad to see us, because we always project on him. Our perceptions of God that may not be true. I mean, like, what's your God like? Has he got the hammer ready just to whack you? I mean, I'm waiting for you to mess up. Yeah, I got you then, Come on, some of you guys know what I'm talking about here. Or do you see him just smiling at you all the time saying, come on, I love you? I mean, listen, that is one of the ways that our Joy Center gets to be built there. But the other way is through these life-giving relationships. You see, that woman in that illustration, she just had a small joy bucket. Her father wasn't there. Her father wasn't glad to see her. Her father wasn't there, giving her what she needed emotionally when she was growing up. So she had a deficit. Her joy bucket was small, and when crisis and pain came, she couldn't handle it. And then all of a sudden, she lost it. And it didn't take much for her to lose it, because she did not have the capacity to return back to that place of joy. People heal in authentic relationships. See, if this is you tonight, if I've described you like this, we can't cast this one out. We can't pray the prayer and all of a sudden you're going to be fixed like some of these other things we have done. The only way this is going to be taken care of is you have to get into community, into relationship with other people. Build friendships, be vulnerable, open yourselves up. That's where healing takes place. But oftentimes people with the low capacity are the ones who actually run away from relationships. The very thing that's going to bring healing and wholeness, they just don't seem to be able to connect. So what happens, people have what we would call a love bond. If you grew up in a love bond, which means you grew up in a relationship basically where people were glad to see you, in a love bond relationship, which is the way the church is supposed to be, it says this: I like you and I love you. You're not anything you can do that'll stop me from doing that. I mean, you can fail and blow it and screw up as much as you want to, but I'm still going to love you in the midst of all of that. But I'm going to help you simply come into your destiny, and I'm not going to tell you who you're supposed to be to please me. I'm going to help you find out who you are. And if you grew up in a family like that, you have an advantage in going in life, because now you're able to actually treat other people that way. I happened to be fortunate. I had a family that was that way myself. I mean, they loved me. My dad was a pastor. We didn't have the rules that a lot of pastors' kids had. I mean, a lot of pastor kids didn't do well, but I mean, we seemed to do okay. And because we grew up in a family that I knew that they weren't trying to make me something or be somebody. I didn't have to be somebody for them in a love bond. You're able to be you. And we're able to talk about it whenever we have a disagreement. I mean, we were not on the same page at times. But I knew that no matter what I did, that they were going to love me and be there for me regardless. My parents would not let me buy a car until I was out of high school. Because they said, no, we've seen enough boys, that whenever boys buy their car, they get an independent thing. They can just go anywhere, anytime they want to. So if you need to use a car, you have to use our car, the family station wagon. A yellow family station wagon. That was embarrassing. I'm not going anywhere. Because I played sports, I always got pulled into this crowd that, this little popular crowd. I didn't care to, but I just got pulled into that. And so, they're going to say, hey, Rodney, why don't you come by? And I go, no, I'm not coming by your place or anybody's place, because I'm driving that family station wagon, and I'm not going to do that. And then I get invited to these parties that I wouldn't attend. And the reason is because I had a curfew. I had an 11 o'clock curfew. I mean, here I am. I'm a senior. I had a confrontation with my mom finally, towards the end of my senior year. I'm 18. I'm legal. No car yet, just the family station wagon. And I said, I don't understand. I said, my friends, when they throw this party, they stay out to 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And if I go, I have to be home by 11. I said, what's up with that? Well, why can't I stay out till 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning? And my mom said, well, answer me this. What are you going to do for the Lord, for the glory of the Lord at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning? I said, I wasn't planning on doing anything for the glory of the Lord at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the morning. She goes, that's why you have an 11 o'clock curfew. But you see, I can have those kind of confrontations with my parents. I'm not on your page. And when I raised my sons, we did it the same way. And there were times, I remember one time my oldest was wanting to do something. I'm like, ooh, this is not going to be good. And he's like, I'm going to do this. And I go, well, let me ask you this. I really don't want you to do this. I'm just going to ask you just to honor me. I pulled out the honor card. He goes, okay, Dad, you and I are not on the same page. I am totally in disagreement. But because of that, I will do what you ask. He didn't have to, but he did. See, that's a love environment, and that happens to be a love bond. So a love bond is where you can be, is where you know you're loved, you're free to be who you are, not someone else to please another. A love bond wants the best for the other person. It is desire-driven, and we like being with them, and they like being with us. And so because they like being with us and we like being with them, then it increases your joy capacity. I loved hanging around my family and my parents because it actually fed my joy capacity. That's the way the church is supposed to be functioning. A lot of people grew up in a fear bond relationship. So in a fear bond relationship, you're growing up a home that's probably performance driven, which means this, we have an expectation of you, and it's like we will love you whenever you do what we ask you to do. In other words, and what happens in that environment, you cannot be who you really are. You end up becoming who you think they want you to become. So, you're actually driven a little bit out of fear. And in those particular relationships, what was common, what may have been pain or humiliation or shame, fear of rejection, abandonment or fear of abandonment, maybe some adverse circumstances. And so in that relationship, you actually survived as you went through those early years, and your actions were simply to avoid pain or to avoid feeling. And because you wanted to avoid pain, then you actually I'm going to become who you want me to become because that's easier, to do that. And so you really didn't know who you were growing up because you didn't have the freedom to be who you really were. And perhaps you did that in order to avoid confrontation because confrontation turned ugly. And it wasn't safe for you to share your true feelings because, you're not supposed to feel that way. Like, what is your problem there? And so you get intimidated. And so sometimes you feel, when you're away from them, you feel stronger than when you're with them. But then there are other times you don't know how to act. So you end up becoming kind of in a really kind of a sick way. You actually stick with them because there's a fear of getting away. And so, so a lot of us either grew up in a fear bond or we grew up in a love bond relationship. And if we grew up in a fear bond relationship, sometimes we might have actually embraced a fear-based identity. Let me give you the characteristics of a fear-based identity. Well, let me tell you a story first about, we hired a guy in our church. His name was, I'm not going to give his name, but we hired a guy in our church as our children's pastor. Great children's pastor, really good. He and his wife were coming to our recovery ministry for a few years. They were getting kind of healed in their marriage, and we began to notice he was really good with kids. We hired him because he was really good with kids, and so I had my initial meeting with him. I knew him, cordially, but I never really sat down to say, hey, tell me about your life. It was everybody that said, you got to have this guy on staff. So we pulled him in on staff. And so I knew him generally, but never really sat down with him. Just like, tell me your life. What's going on with you? So he comes to my office, and I'm sitting there, and we had this conversation, and I thought it was a good conversation. We had he talked about some things. I asked some questions, and so I thought it was pretty good. And I didn't know that it wasn't good for a couple of weeks, and then my staff members come in and they go, what did you say to him? I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, he said this, that you said this and said that. And I go, I didn't say that. They go, well, he said you did. And I said, and then he said this, and he said, you said that. And I go, I didn't say that. They go, well, he said you did. When we had our conversation, I had notes and I had readers on, and I was looking over at him, over my readers, as I'm trying to read, some of my notes, which is exactly the way that his father would look at him. He could not even hear what was said accurately. His whole perception was skewed based on his fear. His whole issues he had with his wife came from he had a fear-based identity. Let me read some characteristics of fear-based identity. Fear-based identity does not know how to ask what they need because they were trained as kids not to ask out of fear. The result is that their needs were not met, and they think other people don't care. They can't handle criticism because even if it's valid or constructive, because they perceive any negative feedback as an attack. They use fear-based bonding to ensure that people stay bonded to them because that's all they know. They may be high functioning in many areas of their life, but they're emotionally crippled. They can be successful in some areas, but they can't be successful in relationships. They're needy because they never got their needs met growing up, and so their joy capacity is small. They're not able to confront or give feedback to anybody because they avoid pain and the uncomfortable, so they avoid emotions. They distance themselves in relationships. And what they may even consider to be deep relationships are actually very shallow. But that's all the reality that they know. They become very good at wearing masks for different situations. They're disabled to clean up the mess after conflict. There's a lot of pain avoidance. There's often no resolution. And sometimes they act like nothing ever happened. We had a friend, a family really, that came and they joined in with our family for a lot of celebrations. And my house was always the fun house for everybody to come to. In other words, everybody wanted to come to my home. So when my kids, they didn't always go to somebody else's house. They were like, they just seemed to attract everybody to mine. I remember one night I get up on a Saturday morning and I go out into the den, making my way to the kitchen for some coffee, and I'm looking, there's all these bodies on the floor. Like, where did they come from? They weren't there when I went to bed. our house, you can imagine, we were a fun house and a place to be, okay? So here's one family that loved coming over there and being with it, at least the everybody but the dad. And he was my good friend, but you see, he grew up in a pastor's home, and there was no joy in his home and a lot of control and a lot of negativity, and he was depressed half of the time, it seemed, because of this stuff in his growing up. So what happened is that we'd get together, we'd have a party, we're having a birthday, we're having something like that, and we're enjoying ourselves, and he's sitting there on the couch, like a knot on the log, like, what is your problem? We're all having a good time, and you look... you're over there like doing nothing. Like, what's wrong with you? And, I didn't say that, but I'm kind of thinking this stuff and over again. And finally I asked him, I said, what is going on with you? Every time we get together and have a great time, you're over there just sulking like, we just slapped you or something like that. And for the longest time, he said, I don't know. I just kind of, and when I get to your house, I kind of get depressed. Like, what? This is a fun place. And then one day he came to me and he says, I figured it out. Every time I come to your house and I see all the joy that is going on, I'm reminded that I never had this growing up. So while everybody else is feeling joy, all I can feel is pain. And then I began to find out if you've got a fear-based identity and that's the way you've lived life, then that's really what happens to you is that you can, this is why you bring somebody to a party or to a fun place and they just sit there on the couch and sulk, like what is their problem? It's because they're feeling pain rather than feeling the joy. And this is sometimes what happens. People come and all of a sudden they see everybody jumping, excited and everything. Oh, this is, and you're going, this is amazing. And they're sitting back there going, oh, this hurts. I'm not getting into this stuff right here because it's not bringing them joy. It's actually they're feeling pain because they didn't have the joy. And then after a while, they drop out. When they do, if they come back, that's a good sign. They're working through it. Now, later on, I began to recognize this is what's happening. So I would just, whenever they're, and I recognize that we're enjoying ourselves in worship, and they're pouting back in the back row in their moodiness, and I go back to them and I said, is this bringing up pain for you? Are you feeling pain? And they say, yes. And this is what I say, listen, I know this is painful, but if you will just hang in here with us, if you will just push in and don't run from community, because that's what they do. They escape. They get out the back door and they run away. And so I say, well, can you hang in here with us? Just enough. If you can just hang in here with us, it will change for you. We're glad you're here, and we're glad to see you, and you are important to us. And I know whenever I say that, you may not even believe me, and that might even be painful, but hang in here. Eventually, your joy capacity will begin to increase, and then one day you'll be able to join in here with us. Is this making sense to anybody? First John 4:18 says that there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. Fear involves punishment, and the one who fears is not perfected in love. So if you say identify with that, your solution is not going to be to pray a prayer. It's going to be push into relationship. Push into relationship. Get connected with people and get vulnerable with people. Now, the reason I even bring this up is because sometimes when somebody has a fear-based identity, and that's all they know how to relate to people, they actually become an oppressor over people. You see, some people who have a fear-based identity, the only way they know how to relate to people is through fear, through control, through domination. And so what happens is that when somebody is stuck in that and they don't know anything else, then they become oppressors. It could be a boss, it could be a spouse, it could be a grown child, it could be your neighbor, it can be somebody. It's like when I get next to that person, I don't want to get next to them. In fact, I try to avoid them, because when I get next to them, I feel this pressure to be somebody that I'm really not. And even if you grew up in a love bond relationship, you still feel that from them. And whenever you feel that oppression from them, there's probably something demonic that is on that. And this is where maybe a spirit of Jezebel or a controlling spirit, or somebody who's actually just, they're imposing upon you. And so therefore you feel the fear anytime you get next to them or get close to them, because you get oppressed by that. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? And in that relationship, there is a loss of true identity. You're living under oppression. You feel the oppression. You're living in fear. You feel controlled. You feel manipulated. You feel resentful. And the more you're away from them, the more freedom you feel. That oppression that you feel, we can break that off. Let's stand. Those of you who've been here the last couple or last day, you know the drill. We're all going to do this together, whether you need to or not. This prayer is in the book. It's in the Liberated book, in the back of it. So let's just repeat after me. Say, I will live in perfect love. I will live in perfect love. That casts out all fear. That casts out all fear. I cast off the yoke of domination. I cast off the yoke of domination. I now choose to forgive this person for their sin against me and their oppression over me. I break the power of their words off of me. I break the victim spirit off of me. I rebuke the fear of man that I've lived under. I cancel my bond to them. I declare the blood of Jesus to be a wall between us. I take back my true identity. I will not live under oppression. I receive my Father's love. I'm now free to live and to love. Okay, you can be seated. Very interesting that particular prayer. I taught this in England one time. I know some of you are feeling this one, because it always happens, especially if you've been under that for a while. I taught this in England one time, and I met the guys who they basically had a downtown mission part in the poverty areas in London. And I met them at Reading at a leaders thing, and they came up to me. They says, of all of the things you taught us and all of the prayers that we pray with the people downtown who are disabled, taken out by life, we pray that one more than any other one. We see a lot of people in freedom. All right, let's cover one more area. Are we good? I mean, if I'm going longer than you, if you need to go or whatever like this, I'm not trying to spend a lot of time on these. I'm actually giving you the Reader's Digest condensed version of these two words, okay? These two messages. So, all right, let's go to the second one. We're going to talk about bitter root judgments on this one here. Now, there are laws that our universe has that we are bound to them, right? You can't escape them. They're universally binding, like the law of gravity. I mean, you can't escape that one. And no matter where you go on earth, you're going to find that law happens to be in effect, right? Well, understand that there are laws that heaven has that really we are bound to because they are universally binding. And one of those laws is the law of the harvest, the law of sowing and reaping, the law of a return there. And it's both in the positive and the negative. And so if you understand this law and you cooperate with heaven on this law, it actually positions you for great blessing. But if you don't understand this law and you don't cooperate with heaven on it, it can turn out kind of bad for you. In this law, you first of all, you reap what you sow, right? I mean, you sow corn, you don't get green beans, you get corn. So you reap what you sow, you reap more than you sow, right? I mean, because when you plant one corn, you just don't get one back. You get a few ears of corn that have hundreds of kernels on each one of these things. So the way God set his kingdom up, he set it up for increase. He set us up to experience increase. So when we understand this law, cooperate with this law, it positions us to live in a place of increase. We know that that's true financially. Ballard didn't talk about it, but in depth, but we know that it's true. We know, just like Paul said in the book of 2 Corinthians chapter 9, when he uses actually the sowing and the reaping there, when you sow sparingly, you reap sparingly. You sow bountifully, you reap bountifully. Each one must determine it. And that whole concept there is about giving. It's about finances there that is there. And so, those of you who've been understand this principle, you know how you get blessed and you live in the place of blessing financially whenever you do that. So you reap what you sow, more than you sow, but you also reap later than you sow because it doesn't happen immediately. It doesn't come, quickly. There is a time lag that happens with that. And what happens if people have been sowing to the flesh, and because they don't reap immediately, they think they got away with it. But Galatians 6:7 says God is not mocked. In other words, God is saying, you can count on it happen. Whatever man sows, he will reap. I mean, he said that. That's the mail. I'm just delivering the mail, okay? That is what God has to say about this. So a person who's been sowing to the things of the flesh, and they think, I'm getting away with this stuff. I'm telling you, you activate a force, and it will come. It will come back to you. God basically will see it. That happens. So another thing we must realize is that the spirit realm is the true reality. We have limitations on what we see right now. We see partially. We don't see fully into what is even the room. But God's reality, the spirit realm, is true reality. And there are things that happen in the spirit realm that we actually activate it, and our understanding of these things can bring us into life, but our misunderstanding or ignorance of these things can actually just be pretty devastating to us. When Jesus goes to his hometown in the book of Luke chapter 4, he quotes out of Isaiah chapter 61 and pretty much gives his job description. And it says that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the afflicted. He sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and freedom to the prisoners. Now, you know the difference between a prisoner and a captive. Well, a prisoner is in bondage because of something that they did, something they participated in. But a captive is in bondage not because of what they did, but because of what somebody else did. So you can find yourself in a place of bondage not because of your activity, but because of the activity of other people. But the good news is whether you're a prisoner or a captive, he's announcing freedom. There's freedom to us here. So Hebrews chapter 12, verse 15. This is kind of like the key verse. Hebrews 12:15, and it says this. It says, see to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many be defiled. So you can come short, fall short of the grace of God. The grace is God's empowerment. God's empowerment. What you need for the moment that you need it. That's the grace. God's empowering. See to it that you don't fall short of what God provides for you. That no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and many be defiled. In other words, what happens is that I can do something that actually will defile others, and that's really what this is. So, because if I begin to do this sowing thing, there's going to be a reaping that's going to happen. In reality, as we're going to describe here, people actually feel the effect of my sowing and actually begin to act in ways that they normally can resist apart from me, but because they're connected with me, they're feeling the effect of what I have sowed, and they're not unaware of what they're actually experiencing, so they end up falling captive to that because it is a strong compulsion that pulls them into a particular kind of behavior. You see, the way the spirit realm, the kingdom is supposed to be operating is because when people have a connection with me and a relationship with me, and I'm sowing to the things of the Spirit, there is a return that is coming back to me. And not only is it coming back to me, but those who are connected with me will feel the effects of that. So if you get connected with me and you're in a relationship with me, the fruit of that is that you're going to be stronger. You're going to be better. You're going to have an advantage. You're going to have an edge into coming into your destiny. But the other thing is true, that if we have some things like a root of bitterness and we've been sowing into that, then what happens, then the people around me are not better. They're actually even worse because they don't really realize what is actually happening to them. And if there's a root of bitterness that is there, usually the fruit of bitterness is going to be judgment. Because if I have bitterness there, that's how it manifests. And this is what Jesus said about judging. Matthew chapter 7, he says, judge not that you be not judged. For with the judgments you pronounce, you're going to be judged. And with the measure you use it'll be measured back to you. Why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own? And how can you say to your brother, well, let me take the speck out of your eye when you have a 2x4 in your own? Well, it doesn't say that, but that's close. You hypocrite. Take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So what is a judgment? A judgment is when we declare a final verdict on another person. It's not saying that what they did isn't true. It's not saying that you didn't perceive it accurately. It's not saying that they didn't do that, but yet you're actually making a pronouncement on who they are, their character, and their motives. For example, if Johnny steals money, I'll say Johnny is a thief. Now, how am I using that word thief? Am I talking about his activity because he stole? I could be doing that. That he stole some money. That's what thieves do. He's a thief because he stole money. And I could be using that term to describe his activity. But if I'm using that term to describe his identity, this is who he is. This is his motives. And I'm talking about him as a person, in his character, and passing a verdict on that, then that would be judging. You see, anytime I make an assessment on another person that's not in connection with how God sees them, then I'm making a judgment. Now, there is a righteous judgment, and the righteous judgment actually, will see people, but that righteous judgment sees the heart. It comes from the heart of God and from the mind of God. So whenever we make a judgment, it needs to be a righteous judgment that's in agreement with the heart of God and the mind of God. And when God looks at Johnny, God doesn't see him as a thief. He sees him according to his destiny. He sees him as heaven sees him, not according to his activity. So he doesn't see him according to his activity. He sees him who he is. God only relates to you as heaven sees you, not how you see yourself or your activity or behavior. They brought Jesus to Jesus, this woman who was caught in adultery. And what do we have with this woman here? We have a person who had an activity of sin. There was no denying this woman had committed the act. But how did Jesus relate to her? He didn't relate to her based on her activity. He based on how heaven saw her. Mercy triumphs over judgment. So how does God relate to a sinner who's in the middle of sin? Mercy triumphs with judgment. He basically spoke into her possibilities. He didn't accuse her, and then he showed her potential, go and sin no more. Even though most likely she did go sin, but still he spoke into what was possible. You see, because that's a heavenly, Jesus would say, when I judge with what heaven, I do nothing on my own initiative. I only do what I see the Father doing, say what I hear the Father saying, and he says, my judgments are just. And so therefore, heavenly righteous judgment, we can make a righteous judgment if it's with the mind of God and the heart of God. But when I'm basically judging a person outside of that, then that's what's going to come back to me. And it's going to come back to me as we looked at yesterday, if you were here yesterday, we looked at that Luke chapter 6, verse 38 in the context of judging, where it says, given and shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, pouring into your lap, right? By your standard of measure, it's going to be measured back to you, which is the context of judging, not money. And so that when the person says, I think everybody's always judging me. I go, well, who have you been judging, right? Because it's coming back to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over. It is the law of sowing and reaping. You cannot, it will happen. It will come back to you. And when it comes back to you, it comes back to you in greater increments than when it left you. So let me give you about 3 ways that Bitterroot's judgments impact you. The first way is this, that people around you either become or they act out whatever you judged. There's a book on freedom that Doris Wagner compiled. It's you have that book because you're going to have it for your class. You're coming up there. But in that book there, she compiled all these different things. Cindy Jacobs wrote a chapter on Bitterroot judgments. And she tells the story of her. She gets to tell several of her stories, so it's pretty good. But she tells a story when she was younger in her life, and it's just a young mother. Her husband, Mike, he worked for American Airlines, and so he comes home one day, and he says, "Hey, I made a decision." He said, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to quit my job, and we're going to pack up, and we're going to move, and I'm going to work on my master's." She said, "What? We never talked about that. What made you decide?" I go, "I don't know. I just decided we're going to do that." And so I'm going to quit my job. We're going to pack up, and we're just going to move, and I'm going to work on my master's. And so she spent the night trying to tell him, We need to talk about this further. We need to kind of process this thing. But he made up his mind. We're going to do that. Then, of course, the next day when he goes off to work, she's having a conversation with God. What in the world is going on with him? He's lost his brain. She's complaining, about her husband. And all of a sudden, God brought back a memory that she had when she was young, when her dad was a pastor of a church, probably living in the parsonage, and probably had a really bad board meeting that went south on him. Comes home one night and says, we're packing up and leaving tomorrow. No explanation. Didn't tell him why. Left all of her friends, left her what she knew. And basically she made this judgment. That's what the men of my life do. They make decisions without me and enslave me to their decisions. And then she realized, oh no. I sowed a seed with my husband, sowed a judgment against my father, and I'm reaping it with my husband. So she repented. God, forgive me for this, forgive me for that. She confessed and she repented. Made it right with God. Her husband comes home. She's waiting for him to talk further about this. He says nothing. So she asks it up. She asked him, she brings it up. So what about this moving thing? He goes, oh, I don't know, right in the middle of the day, I just changed my mind. Sometimes we find ourselves in this same loop. If you find yourself in the same loop, endless situation happening over and over and over again, we might have to sit back and think, okay, did I set something in motion that I sowed that I'm reaping? One of the classic books on inner healing is written by John and Paula Sanford, The Transformation of the Inner Man. They have a chapter on bitterroot judgments. And in that, they tell the story of a man who basically had a mother who couldn't take care of him. She's just disabled. What she did, she couldn't take care of them, couldn't clean, couldn't do any of that stuff, and was, because of her wounding, medicated on food, and got to a place where she was just getting quite large. And it was like, he began making judgments against his mother. He married a woman. She wasn't a large woman when they got married, but, after 2 or 3 kids, she couldn't keep the weight off. And so he began to put those rejection things on top of her, speak those things, which pushed her buttons because she had a father she could never please. And so she made those judgments against her father, so that all of a sudden, with the Sanfords, they realized we both had sowed with our parents and were reaping with our spouses. I have a friend named Joanne Moody who has an incredible testimony of healing, been in pain for 14 years or so. Her book is called Moment by Moment. Her testimony is so amazing, so incredible. And so I was talking about, we were doing a conference together this last October, and I preached on bitterroot judgments. She goes, okay, I've got to tell you a couple of stories. She says, first of all, but she said something happened with my son. Okay, now her son, was her pain came whenever she had her one and only son, and nerve was basically clipped, and so she was in this excruciating pain. She couldn't stand. Only comfortable position was on her knees on the floor, disabled for years. The miracle is God healed her, at a Global Awakening conference, but it was a miraculous thing. But, people would always ask her, like, how's your son doing? And he's grown. And she said, this was my response. I don't know. He never calls. He never texts. I don't have a relationship with him. He's gone. He doesn't know anywhere that I am, in the world. And I don't think he loves me. And personally, I think he thinks that I love my friends more than I love him. And one time she was with one of her friends who were part of their Agape Freedom Fighter ministry team. And she looked at Joanne and she goes, that sounds like a bitterroot judgment, because it created an expectation. She goes, you have a bitterroot judgment against your son. She goes, I do not. I love my son. I mean, and she really does. She has she genuinely, like, this, he's the treasure of my life. There's nothing there. She goes, no, that sounds like a bitterroot judgment. She goes, you need to break that off. She goes, I don't need to do that. She goes, yes, you do. She goes, okay. Just to please you, I'll do that. So she, went through the prayer, and she broke off her bitterroot judgment with her son, because what happened, that created expectation that then in the spirit realm that was actually coming against him. She said, no lie, 3 minutes after I did that, I get a text from my son. He says, Mom, I don't know where in the world you are. I just want you to know I'm thinking about you and that I love you. She said, all the things I just said, he just addressed all of those things. I have another friend of mine named Candace who actually has an amazing testimony. She was hooked. She wasn't even a believer, and she was hooked on crack cocaine and had an encounter with Jesus in a jail cell where she gave her heart to Jesus. But she worked through all this stuff. But because of her crack cocaine, she lost her relationship with her husband, with her kids, all that stuff. She lost all of it. She lost her life. And then she kept saying, after she got out, she's walking, she's getting clean, she's in a halfway place, she's going through Elijah House stuff, the Sanford stuff, learning about bitterroot judgments, and realize this is what she kept saying. She kept saying, my husband will never forgive me. He's already already gone on. He's living, married somebody else. My husband will never forgive me. I will never see my kids. I will never have a part of their life again. So pay attention. The I will never, or this will never, those absolutes, always, never, those kinds of words that you begin to say like that. What she was doing, she was actually in the spirit realm making a declaration. The power of those words were simply going out, and they're feeling the effects of that. And what she was, those expectations were actually in a spiritual realm putting a force on there, so she wasn't hearing anything. And she said, God, forgive me for doing that. She said, that was in the morning. That afternoon, I get a phone call from somebody, a number, I don't know who it is. I answer it, and it's my husband, my ex-husband. He says, I don't know, I was just thinking about you today. And I think, it's about time you begin to re-enter your kid's life. These expectancies actually become a self-fulfilling prophecy that we set in motion in the spirit realm. First thing that happens, people around you become or act out what you have judged. Secondly, another way it could happen to you is that you become what you've judged. The guy who said, who had a father who was absent, or maybe he was an alcoholic, or maybe he was abusive, but he couldn't meet his legitimate needs and his expectations that he would have. Basically said, I will never do that. He even made some vows and judgments against his father, and then he finds himself actually becoming the same person that his father was. Or maybe here's the woman whose mother was a screamer. I mean, she just yelled and yelled and yelled. She goes, I will never be a screamer. And then she has kids. Or maybe you had parents who were controlling and manipulating, and I mean, they're always in their business. They might have been nice people, wonderful people, but they were always telling you what to do. And then even when you get old, they do that. They come over to your house and go, well, you know how you should mow your lawn, and they're giving you all their tips and stuff like this. And they go, you can borrow my weed whacker. I mean, that thing's really good at the way it does it. And I mean, they're always telling you how to run your life, do your stuff in your life. And you go, I will never do that. I'm not going to be controlling. And you're always mad at them. And then you become the very same thing yourself. It's the law of return. You see, when you understand the law of return, if you're sowing into the right things, it can bring you to a place of blessing. But if you're not, you position yourself to a place of cursing there. First Corinthians 7:14. We talked about this yesterday. This is as an illustration. It says that just to summarize it, that the unbelieving spouse is sanctified by the believing one. In other words, this is a kind of a biblical precedent that what somebody does will affect another person. The unbelieving spouse basically feels the pressure. They feel, the effect of what their sanctified spouse is doing. And so what happens, even though they might continue to act according to the flesh, they feel the pressure, the pressure for the imposing transformation, because God is extending grace to them. Cindy Jacobs also has a story about this in her book. She says she had a friend who kept talking about her unbelieving husband. And this is what she would say: he doesn't want anything to do with God. He doesn't want anything to do with God. He doesn't want to be born again. He doesn't want to accept Christ. And finally, Cindy said, I think that's a bitter-root judgment. And she goes, you think so? She goes, yeah. So she repented, confessed, renounced, and within a week, her husband gave his life to Jesus. So first of all, people around you become or act out what you've judged, or you become what you've judged. But sometimes, another way I'm affected is like, I did not do anything. I just happened to be close to or in relationship to somebody who's been judging, and I'm getting the fallout from that. It's like collateral damage. I'm just close enough to them in a relationship that what I'm feeling is really actually coming from them. And the thing is, since I'm getting slime from them, but don't really understand where it's coming from, and it's because I don't understand the spirit realm, and I don't understand what's going on, so I don't know how to counteract what I'm feeling. So I'm feeling a compulsion there to behave or act or react in a certain way, and because I don't understand that I don't have to act that way, I give into that because it's what I feel at the moment to do, because that they're actually reaping what they have sowed, and I'm just close enough to them that I'm feeling that, not realizing that's what's actually going on with me. You see, this, like I said, the ways that the Spirit is supposed to work is that if you get connected to me and close to me, and what happens, because I'm sowing into the things of the Spirit and I'm sowing into things of heaven because you're close to me, then all of a sudden, whenever that stuff start coming back at me, you're going to get some collateral blessing because you're connected with me. And the result of that is that you're going to be better and you're going to be stronger. You're going to be an overcomer because you're reaping whatever I'm sowing. But if I'm just throwing out that negative stuff right there, that's what's going to come back. And what happens, people go, I don't know what I'm feeling, and they don't realize this. You see, when somebody judges you, what happens? They set in emotion to be judged. And now you feel that compulsion, like, I'm going to judge you, you judge me. So, in other words, I'm feeling it, and it's a pressure that I feel. It's like, I got to give into that, you feel like doing that because they're going to reap what they have sowed. And so that's in the spirit realm, that's coming at you. But the good news is you're strong enough. That's why he says to bless those who curse you, do not judge. And what happens, you actually activate a greater blessing that's going to come back to you because you resisted whatever they have sowed. Is this making sense? Well, here's the good news. Mercy does triumph over judgment. James 2, it just said, but understand that there's no cheap grace. I mean, Jesus paid for it. He suffered for it. And so whenever he did what he did and he paid for it, he actually took the full payment upon himself. The full legal demand of sowing and reaping, was paid for in what he did on the cross. That's the really good news. Jesus became our curse. So that means I'm going to reap whatever I sowed. But since Jesus became my curse, I can actually pull him into this situation and we can stop this. I may not have stopped all of the effects of it. I mean, for example, that woman was caught in adultery. Okay, there's probably are still effects consequences that she had to go through in her life. I mean, there were still some relationship consequences that were there because of what she did. But still, it was the opportunity for everything else to be broken off her because mercy triumphed over judgment. And so what happens is that if there's been anything that's come out of me that would come back to me, I can cancel it. If there's anything that other people around me have sowed and been coming back to me, I can stop that from coming back to me too. That's good news. That's really, really good news. Some people think, well, I don't know if I have any bitter roots. Well, understand it's a root. It's like you don't see the root until something springs up. I mean, you ever have something come up, you have a huge elm tree over here, all of a sudden an elm tree pops up and you go, okay, that didn't come from a seed. That popped up from a root. So that means I have blind spots, and I don't know that I have those blind spots until they spring up. Cindy didn't know that she had a bitter root until it sprung up. But who knows where the roots are even before they spring up? So we can actually begin to cancel things that are in the hidden, even though we don't even know what they are, because Jesus knows where the roots are. And we can begin to take care of those things now. Last October, I did an online thing with a bunch of with the ministry school. There's about 14 women in this ministry school. I taught on this. I talked to the leader about a month later. She says, I can't tell you all that happened. She said, all I know is that with the next week, 6 of those women said, we had immediate breakthrough in our family after we prayed that prayer. Another woman who worked for Global Awakening, she said, what's God been telling you or teaching you lately? And I said, well, I started teaching this thing on bitter root judgment. She goes, oh, I think I might need that. And so I just turned her on to a place where I had taught it, and she got it. And then she actually shared it with a friend who shared it with her pastor. In fact, then they had the whole staff watch it, and she said, reconciliation came to the whole staff. I preached at our men's retreat at our church had. It's a big, we had like 620 men at this retreat. It's a massive retreat. One of the guys, they started getting these reports. Like one of the guys said he's estranged from his children because of his bad choices. And he's like, I will never see them again. They'll never want anything to do with me. After the camp was over, Sunday afternoon, got my forgiveness book, read it through, worked through the process there, broke all of the bitter roots. He said, Monday morning, I got a text from my daughter-in-law. It says, can we meet this week? Then on Wednesday, got a text from his son. and his daughter-in-law in another city. It says, we want to come see you on Saturday and talk to you. In the spirit realm, whenever we do some, some of you were feeling that immediately yesterday, some immediately things broken off. This is something that will do that for many of you. So we're going to do that. Obviously, we're not going to get everything covered. I mean, you're going to have to kind of spend some time with the Holy Spirit trying to figure out what some of these things are. Confession and repentance is how we activate this. And you're going to have to just kind of do business with God. I do not have any of this stuff that we're going to cover tonight in written form back there. But what I will probably do is send Wendy a copy of this prayer that she could give you. This one takes a little bit longer to do. Are we good? Then let's stand, whether you need to or not. And repeat after me. Say, Father, forgive me for standing in your place as judge. I lay down my self-imposed responsibility to judge the heart, the motives, the intentions, and the actions of people. I repent for my pride that is evident when I'm critical or have judgmental thoughts. Forgive me for judging others and expose it when I have a log in my own eye. Forgive me for the bitter root judgments I've made, thought, or spoken against others. I renounce and break the judgments that I've made. Jesus, I ask you to remove from those I've slimed the entanglements and the bondages of judgments, and to bless them. I lay all consequences of the judgments that I've sowed at the foot of the cross to be removed by the blood of Jesus. I take back the ground that I've given over to bitterness. And Jesus, I ask you to remove all residue of bitterness in my life. I break the curse of judgments off my bloodline and set me and my descendants free from those consequences. I take authority over all curses and judgments that came against me from others. I cancel those assignments and I return a blessing on those that those assignments came from. Fill me, Jesus, with your love and compassion. Thank you, Jesus, that nothing's impossible for you. Now let me just pray for you. Holy Spirit, I ask you just to come now and begin to wash off of us. Cleanse us. Wash it off of us. You said in your word that when we confess our sin, not only do you forgive us, but you cleanse us. Wash off all residue of every judgment that's come from us or come from others. Thank you that the cross is sufficient. Thank you that you can expose and take care of even the things we don't even see now because they haven't come up. Now just stay in this place for just a moment and let it just fall off of you. It's going to be like the shedding of a skin or something. Or scales. Just let it fall. Let it fall. Let him cleanse. Let him do it. Some of you are going to feel like you're even under a shower. You're going to feel like the rain is just coming on you and coming over you. Some of you may even feel like oil just running down your body. It's the Lord removing all the stuff, all of those arrows. They've come back at you. He's taking them off, moving them, taking them away. Just receive his cleansing. Because we're just doing something in the spirit realm that's counteracting, disabling those assignments of hell. Where we can break judgments. Just receive. Let him do it.